InFi, episode 35.
Welcome to InFi, the future of finance, hosted by American economist and author Dr. Robert Murphy. Each week, tune in for dynamic discussions with business pioneers about emerging trends in finance, life insurance, asset management, technology, and more. Now, let's talk the future of finance.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the InFi podcast. Today, I'm going to be speaking with Jeff Briggs, who is the Chief Financial Officer here at Infino. So that's how I came to know Jeff. And as you can imagine, me being the chief economist, Jeff and I work together on a lot of projects, particularly those involving economic or financial modeling. But besides his work here directly at Infino, I've just known for a while that he's a really interesting guy. And so that's what I thought we would want to pull out in this podcast. So let me go ahead and read from his official bio, and then I'll give you a little more color. Jeff is a former systems engineer for NASA, with his primary project now generating power on the Perseverance Mars rover that landed in February 2021. He's now an entrepreneurial executive with extensive finance and operations experience, working with dozens of venture-backed startups from pre-launch through exit. He started by working on behalf of private investors to evaluate and execute startup deals, and later transitioned to working with venture-backed companies to guide them through funding, forecasting, and managing cash flow, as well as M&A. So specifically, we're going to talk a lot in this episode about Jeff's experience at NASA, and then beforehand when he was getting a physics PhD. And then we also have a little interlude. He was on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? So we talk about, that game show. We talk about that a little bit too. And then, of course, we conclude with what he's learned at Infino in terms of the landscape, financial landscape, blockchain, and so forth, which is what we're specializing in here. And so there you go. Hope you enjoy this episode. I had a lot of fun conducting it. Jeff, welcome to the InFi podcast.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Happy to be here.
So it's fitting that you've got Albert peering over your shoulder there, because I know that's one of the things I want to talk about before. At some point, obviously, we'll dive into more Infino specific items, but let's start a little bit earlier than that in the origin story of the superhero Jeff Briggs. What did you originally want to go into physics? Am I understanding that right?
So by originally, if you mean in college, then yes. So I think
let me so for example, when I was in 7th or 8th grade, I was reading books by Richard Feynman, and I thought I wanted to be a theoretical physicist. Like, were you like that or not?
Not really. No, I was kind of all over the map as a kid growing up. I think originally, if you asked me what I wanted to be in like elementary school, it's probably like a park ranger or something like that.
Oh, really? Oh.
So yeah. It just kind of happened that, as I got into high school and all that kind of stuff, like I just ended up being really good at the math and physics and all the sort of analytical stuff. It just kind of came naturally to me. Mm-hmm. So thinking about what I wanted to do after high school, getting into college, I didn't really have any sort of clue. But I knew math and physics was something that came pretty easy to me. So I just kind of ended up doing that as a major. Also, pretty much had an econ major as well, but they'd only give you 2.
Okay.
So I've always kind of been...
You were literally at undergrad a double major in math and physics?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. But I mean, even going back to like junior high, this is when, stock prices were still printed in the newspaper and stuff like that. I was messing around after school, after sports practice, like tracking stocks and things like that. So I've always been into finance as well.
I used to go to the library and get the statistical abstract of the U.S. to get the budget figures for the Reagan administration to see, was it really true that the tax cuts caused the deficits, or was it, so I can, that was not what.
Yeah, imagine that got you a lot of dates in high school.
No, surprisingly not. So you're in undergrad, you double major in math and physics, and then what's your next step?
So kind of, again, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I did know that I had done a couple internships at NASA. Believe it or not, there's a NASA facility in Cleveland, Ohio, where I'm from. Mm-hmm. So first couple summers did not anything related to school for my summer jobs. I was a garbage man a couple of years. There's this backstory there too. That was a family business. But between junior and senior year, I ended up getting an internship at NASA Glenn Research Center in Cleveland. And just really one of the things that, I picked up on, one was that's not what I want to do forever. basically the internship was, I got there and they gave me like a stack of research papers to read, and that was basically my whole summer. But
you thought I would rather be emptying trash bins than doing this.
Literally doing anything but that. And yeah, one of the things I noticed was that there was this huge disconnect between sort of like the business and finance side of things, because one of the things with an organization like NASA is that the majority of what the government people do is work with outside contractors like Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of like business and contracts and stuff like that and bidding that goes back and forth. And there was just a really big disconnect between like the research side of the house and the people that knew the science and the engineering and the business side of the house. And one side couldn't talk to the other. So basically, the theory I had was if I could learn to do both, that'd be worth something someday. I didn't know really where,
right?
But that's where it came to. So when I was...
and then the narrator comes in and says, and it would be at Infino, but go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So, again, not really knowing what I wanted to do, I was looking at a couple different things. I kind of thought, going that line, if I ended up getting a PhD in physics and then also went back and got an MBA, that would kind of be marrying those two things, top of the field in both. So I ended up applying to PhD programs in physics and ended up getting a fellowship from the Department of Energy to go to a physics program at Dartmouth. And basically, I was getting paid as much as an entry-level job, at least for the first couple of years. And I'm like, well, I don't have to make a decision. I'll go that way, figure out what's going on later. So that was the deep thought that went into me starting a PhD.
Was the DOE paying for that because you were working for NASA or not? Was it nothing?
No, it was unrelated, but it was a fellowship funded by the Department of Energy.
Okay, and so then you're in the PhD program, and then was there a period where you were working for NASA while you were in the PhD program or not?
No. So what I actually did was they wanted me back, so they had offered me like a full-time job. So that was kind of the two things I was toying with coming out of undergrad. And I was going to start this PhD program, so they essentially gave me like an extended internship type thing the summer between when I graduated and when I started the PhD program in the fall. And this will come up later, but essentially they brought me onto the payroll. And when I left to do the PhD program, they kind of made me an offer like, oh, if you do it at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, you can work here and we'll fund it that way. But I really didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted to do the PhD thing full time, at least to start. And they kind of just left me on the payroll when I left to do the PhD. I wasn't getting paid, obviously, but they kind of put me just on like extended leave.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Okay. So then you were at Dartmouth for what, 2 years?
1 year.
1 year. Okay.
Yep.
If you don't mind me, what was that like? Like, was it a quantum leap, no pun intended, in terms of the difficulty compared to, because that was my experience, like from my undergrad, where I like, I'm just going to be frank with folks here. Like I think I was talking econ at the level of the professors. And then when I first went to NYU, which was a top 15 program at the time, like I thought I was at some point in the first year, I thought I was going to fail out. That was just because I wasn't used to being in such a hard program. Like I wasn't used to just not getting straight A's, and I didn't know how to deal with that emotionally. But so in other words, I wasn't close to failing out, but I thought I was because I wasn't used to not going up to the teacher and saying, hey, you had made a mistake on question 8 here. I was like, what the heck are they talking about? So I'm wondering, did you have that kind of experience? Like, whoa, this is the professionals now or not?
Not really. It was more of a cultural difference. Okay. So I went to a real small liberal arts school in Kentucky called Center College. So just an example, there were 4 physics majors in my class. So it wasn't like a big research department or anything. Get to Dartmouth and it's a department of 50 PhD students. Right. So totally different atmosphere. And that was kind of like, it's kind of the deal where you're at the office till midnight every night.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff. But in terms of like the coursework and stuff like that came pretty naturally to me. It was kind of one of the deals where the other PhD students that were in the incoming class kind of thought I was going to fail out because I wasn't necessarily working as long as hours as they were.
I thought you were going to say because you weren't Japanese.
No. So I was like playing poker and things like that. Okay, but actually I was doing fine in all my classes. And the reason I was only there a year was there was a thing where if you completed all the coursework and you passed the PhD qual exam, you could leave and end up with a master's without having to do a thesis or anything like that. So pretty quickly, once I knew I wasn't going to stick around for 7 years, that's what I decided to do. Just kind of load up on classes, get done as much as I can, and pass the qual exam on my first crack. So that's how I ended up leaving with the master's degree in a year.
Okay. Now, you just made an offhand remark. Is it standard? Because I have heard, I don't know if horror stories are the right word, but yeah, it's like to get a PhD in physics, it's not like you're done in 4 years. Is that?
No, you're definitely not.
So how does it, is it because it takes you 4 years to get your coursework done, then you got to take 3 years doing your thesis, or is it's longer to do the thesis?
No, yeah, it's mostly due to the thesis. And I'll just give you a disheartening example of some of the people that I worked with. So after the first semester there, everyone kind of goes into doing TA type things, and then also typically either starts looking for like a research advisor if you're doing theoretical stuff, or a lab if you're going to do a experimental based thesis. So I ended up working for a lab that was building sounding rockets.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the stuff at Dartmouth had to do with plasma physics. And plasma is, if you think of like pipes that are carrying water, like water's flowing through a pipe, and then you have an ocean with currents. Take the equivalent with electricity, and that's what plasma is like the ocean. So if you take the analogy of like the pipe and water, that's like an electrical wire that's carrying current around. When you think of plasma, which is like what the sun's made of, or the aurora borealis and stuff like that, the northern lights, it's basically like an ocean of electricity with currents flowing through it. So that's literally what the northern lights are. So what the lab I was working for was doing was we were building sensors that would go on top of sounding rockets, which are essentially like surplus missiles that are no longer used from the military. And then we would launch these rockets through the aurora, and it would essentially map the electricity through the aurora. So there are these little sensor things, and it would shoot through the northern lights, and electrons or things like that would go through, and it would just kind of like ping a sensor. So you can get the density of all these different things. Well, there's only certain times of the year you can launch those rockets. And there were 2 places we were doing them. One was an old military range in northern Alaska. The other was on this tiny island north of Norway called Svalbard, both of them up in the Arctic Circle. Mm-hmm. And getting back to the example I was talking about, there was a guy I was doing, he was a couple years older than me. So he'd been in the program for 5 years or so. His thesis was around one of these rocket launches and all the sensors that were on there. Mm-hmm. And the rocket exploded like either on the launch pad or shortly after launch. And I think he had to wait 2 more years before he could get another crack at rebuilding the whole thing and getting it launched. So that happened pretty early when I was there. And it's just one of those things where it typically takes people 7 years to do.
Wow. Okay. Stupid question. Is plasma a form of matter? Or is that not the right way to think about it? What is it?
No, it's a form of matter.
It gets so hot that the electrons get stripped off, or is that not right?
No, it is. So it's basically like a soup of electrons and ions, if you will.
Okay. All right. So you were doing that. Did you guys make jokes like, yes, it is rocket science?
Oh, of course.
Of course. Yeah. Did you have t-shirts? Because I have seen people with t-shirts that say that.
Yeah, I wasn't partaking in the t-shirts, but they did exist.
Okay. You were busy playing cards while your buddies were making t-shirts.
Literally.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. My quick story on that was, once I calmed down and realized, like, okay, I'm not going to fail it, I did get a keg and had a keg party because my program was very international, and they were so excited because they had seen that in movies. Like, oh yeah, Americans, they have kegs, and this is amazing. And so anyway, that was my contribution. They were, teaching me Spanish and French and German, and I was showing them how to do a keg stand. So it was good. We all learned from each other.
Priorities.
Yeah. Okay. So you did that. So then you went back. What did you say? Case Western?
No. So the offer was, hey, come back to Cleveland. Case Western Reserve is a university in Cleveland.
Okay.
Do your PhD there, and you can come work here, and we'll pay for it and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of went back to them and said, hey, I am looking to come back. Not really looking to continue the PhD, but what do you think about an MBA?
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of,
so you,
it was kind of my,
you knew you were not getting a PhD as of Dartmouth. It wasn't that you were switching to Case Western.
Yes.
Okay, I got you. Okay, before we leave the PhD, do you have any thoughts? Given that you're pretty world wise, like you kind of get where people are coming from, and I think you're not naive. What was your take on like the, I don't know, if academia or like physics in general? Like, could you see like, oh wow, there's a whole lot of money being spent inefficiently, or like, no, this is basically the way you advance science, and I don't know how else you'd do it? Or
No, I would say, I'm trying to think of the right word, skeptical, a little, it was eye-opening, let's put it that way. And one of the things that I noticed, one was, unless I am definitely going to want to be a professor or something like that, like I don't need the PhD, you know. The level of knowledge I have to this point is likely going to be sufficient for anything I want to do. Going down the path to finishing the PhD is just going to get me a lot of time and energy spent on something that's really super narrow and isn't going to be applicable to anything else I do.
right,
So kind of thinking that what my frame of reference was, I pretty, when you get into the real world, whatever you end up doing typically isn't exactly what you studied in school, like to a T. But as long as you have like the skills to learn what those things are and stuff like that, basically I thought that I had gone far enough towards the knowing both sides of the house, if you will, the business and the science. But one of the things I noticed was, obviously in academia, a lot of things are around publishing and funding and all that sort of stuff. And I noticed this both at NASA and at Dartmouth. A lot of times, every single time, like at NASA, a new administration comes around, or at Dartmouth, like new funding cycles come out from the National Science Foundation or whoever it is. Basically, what happens is people that are doing research, a lot of these research projects span over a decade or two. But the funding sort of situation changes every couple of years, depending on the administration or whatever. And what I noticed a lot of was basically people packaging up the exact same thing they were doing and using it to sort of justify applying for a different grant that was going for something else, but they were going to keep doing the same thing they were doing. So it was more so trying to fit what you're doing into some bucket as opposed to actually trying to answer the questions that the money was trying to answer. And it just seemed like, I'm not going to say worthless, because obviously there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of that, but it seemed a little hypocritical to me.
Okay. Yeah, that dovetails somewhat with, do you know Sabine Hassenfelder? Does that mean anything to you?
I do not, no.
Okay, so she's this German physicist that she's big on YouTube now. She actually recently had a video. It's funny. She said, like, I'm not going to do her accent very well, but, some of the worst teachers I've ever encountered were at grad school. So.
Oh, entirely.
And I was even in an elevator once talking about disillusion when I was, I think, a first-year student, and there were two professors in there. And, I'm standing right there. And the one's like, guy's like, hey, how's your semester this year? And he's like, oh, I have to teach this semester. And he's like, oh, and I'm like, guys, I'm standing right here,
Right.
So
yeah, that's the thing. It's like the professors would rather be doing anything but teaching for the most part.
Yep. I also learned that the absolute worst thing in the world would be the chair of the economics department. Like, I used to think that would be a prestigious thing. It's like, no, that was like draw straws and, I got to be the chair.
Right.
Okay.
Not it.
Okay. So you're back at NASA then, and they're paying for you to get an MBA, or you're just getting an MBA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was like a reimbursement sort of thing. So essentially I was working in systems engineering and project management, and was doing an MBA in the evenings at Case Western Reserve University. So the same place. And basically the way it worked was, I didn't advertise this at the time, but when you do those sort of programs where they pay for it, you're basically like saying, I'm going to stay at least X number of months or years after they pay for that, or else you're going to owe whatever it is back. So my plan the whole time was, okay, I'll do this. I'll kind of suck it up for a couple of years while they're paying for it. And then once the clock runs out, if you will, that's when I'll kind of make my jump into the entrepreneurship world.
So it's basically indentured servitude.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, sounds like how the colonists used to come over and
right.
work for the whatever.
You shall work on the farm of Bob Jones for 6 years.
And then you're a free man and go get your mule and your acres. Okay, so I think I'm mixing up different things from U.S. history there. So you're at NASA. Do you have any fun NASA stories for us?
Do we have any fun ones? Not really. It was a lot of sitting in conference rooms and arguing about contract requirements.
Weren't you, I seem to recall, like, didn't you have something to do with things going to Mars?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, the longest standing project that I was on, so I was on a couple of deep space related things, but the project I was on was essentially the program that builds the nuclear power systems that go on deep space missions. So any sort of, whether it's like a probe or a satellite or a rover, whatever it is, all those things up in space need electricity. So for things that are typically going to like the moon or something that's kind of close in, they basically put big solar panels on them. So like some of the rovers on the moon, have solar panels. For things that are going to places that don't have light, you got to find a different way to power them, right? So one of the things that they do is they actually build nuclear powered power systems. Some of the, more well-known ones are things that are like on deep space orbiters going to the surface of Jupiter and stuff like that, where there's no light.
Because of the distance or because Jupiter's atmosphere blocks it? Or both?
Either.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on either. So like if you're sending a probe like the Viking probe, like way out there, by the time you get past like Jupiter or whatever, you need like square miles of solar panels to collect enough energy, right? So they put these little nuclear things on there. Basically, it's a box that has, it's not stuff you would use in like nuclear weapons, but it's a byproduct of when they used to make them. So it's a different isotope. It's called plutonium-238. And it just basically sits there and gets hot for eternity. It's got like a really long half-life. And they use essentially these little power cells that go on there that convert the heat into electricity. And then they package that into this big box and they just put that on whatever the piece of equipment is. And then the electricity from that charges batteries. And then they use the batteries to power whatever they do. So for like the rover that we have, it can go to like dark spots on Mars. It's called the Curiosity rover. And it might have enough power to maybe move for, I'm just making this up, I don't know the real number, 20 minutes a day, right? So it charges the batteries for 24 hours. Then it's able to do work
from the nuclear plant or from the solar panels?
From the nuclear thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you looked at a picture of the rover, you see this little like box that comes out the back.
Okay.
With some fins on it, and that's what that is.
So hey, so sorry I interrupted you. You're saying even with the nuclear power, it charges the battery that then runs dry in 20 minutes, and then it's got to take a whole daily cycle again to recharge, even using the plutonium?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
I think I'm going to get my numbers like slightly wrong, but I think the thing might have been like 200 watts or something like that.
Okay. All right. So
it's not a lot.
It's not a suitcase nuke, the way people think of that term.
No.
Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. And then is that something you had studied, or is that like something anybody who went through a first year PhD physics program would know how to get their hands dirty and work on that?
Yeah. So the interesting thing was when I was actually working on the project, we did not know what the actual mission was going to be. So this was back in like, call it 2010 or something like that. Probably even earlier than that, 2008, whatever it was. And they knew, and they were going through proposals for potential missions. So one of the missions was just called Mars 2020. Another one was going to be a lander that went on to Europa, a moon of Jupiter. So there were all these different things. Each of them had a need for nuclear power. So we were working on the power system, right? The big box that sits on the back of whatever it is. But we had to make sure that this power system would work with any of the missions that we were doing.
Okay.
Right. So essentially what I was doing was making sure that Lockheed Martin was building the nuclear power system. And we had to make sure that the requirements for that thing encompassed any of the missions it could possibly go on. So we had to make sure that the electromagnetic frequencies wouldn't interfere with the communication systems that are already on Mars. We had to make sure it could survive the chemical environment on Jupiter, like all these different things. So essentially, what my piece was sort of managing all of those requirements from all the different missions and making sure that whatever Lockheed built met all of those different specs.
Okay, so
I would say it's really not anything you would study in any sort of physics or engineering program, but having sort of like that broad knowledge to understand at least all of the different specifics is something. So it was more of like something where you had to be very broad and have a lot of knowledge in a bunch of different things.
Okay, so out of curiosity, was there, no pun intended, was there Was there somebody at Lockheed doing the exact same thing and you were just double checking? Or was it like it was your job or your team's to come up with the specs and that they were just going to robotically build it? And if it didn't, or were they also working on it to say, whoa, actually, shouldn't we take into account such and such? Because if they go to Jupiter, this will happen. And were you guys going back and forth?
So the way we did it was, I would work with the teams, and it was more than just me. I mean, there were like multiple people here, but we would work with the teams that were sort of designing these different missions and sort of dragging all the requirements out of them, the specific stuff. And then what Lockheed would do is they would put together a design and set up different tests and verification things to prove that they're meeting each of these requirements. So it was more so like we were putting together the architectural drawing and they had to make like the actual detailed blueprint.
Okay.
To make sure that it met the original vision.
But I guess my question was, they were just assuming you guys knew what you wanted, that they weren't double checking and coming back to you and saying, we were thinking about it. And wouldn't you rather have us build something that went blah, blah, blah? Okay.
Nope.
Okay. One other one here, and this isn't a gotcha. Was there something where one of the rovers fell into a ditch because they got the units of measurement wrong, or am I getting mixed up with something?
It was, yeah. So that was actually, it was a landing thing, I believe. So I think they were sending it down on a parachute. I can't remember if it was on the moon or on Mars, but yeah, they essentially,
if it was a parachute, they wouldn't work on the moon, right?
It could. It would just, get less atmosphere. But they also had like this airbag thing. It was like a giant airbag that would like bounce and then it would open up and the thing would come out. But it was like they used feet instead of meters or something like that. And instead of the thing opening up, it just like crashed into the surface. I can't remember the details, but something along those lines definitely happened.
Okay. I hope that was not your project.
That was not. No.
Okay, good. Okay, so the last question I have about this is, at what point did they tell you about how they faked the moon landing? Was that like day 7 of the job, or they wait later?
I'd have to kill you, Bob.
Okay, good answer. I ask that anytime I talk to somebody who works with NASA. Okay, you guys will slip at some point. I'm just letting you know. Okay. So next, before we get into the more recent stuff, you were on, was it Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Is that the name of the show?
Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Yeah.
So how did that happen? And so folks, I'll put in the show notes page, but you can go Google Jeff Briggs, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and you'll see him. And it's him. He's younger. He's got a lot of energy.
Yeah, got a lot more hair than I do right now.
And the host was intrigued. Like you came, like she thought you were a character.
And coming to the hot seat now is NASA scientist Jeff Briggs. Hey, nice to meet you, Jeff. I'm great. How are you? I wonder if the cameras can get a shot of your shoes.
Can we see?
Can you
maybe
see
over
those?
here?
Look at them. Can they see? Well, those are like they're gloves for your feet.
Yeah, they're like gloves for your feet.
So that's what the NASA scientists wear? They wear these little gloves on their feet?
Oh, well, not everyone, but
no, but you. And you have a monkey on your chest?
I do. It's a snow monkey, actually.
Okay, so you're a little, well, how would you describe yourself?
I think quirky might be the word.
Quirky and also very, very smart. So this is the right place
helps.
for you. You know the rules.
So how did that happen?
Yeah, it was really random and it happened really quickly. So this was actually before I started my PhD. Mm-hmm. So I was working at NASA for the summer, and I had about a week between when I had to move from Cleveland up to New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. So I also got my wisdom teeth out that week. Mm-hmm. And I was staying at my dad's house for the summer, and I got my wisdom teeth out. My cheeks were literally out to here. I couldn't eat for like a week. So I was basically just laying on the couch for a week in pain. I saw commercials on daytime TV for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, tryouts in downtown Cleveland. Mm-hmm.
Did you watch the show? Like, were you a fan of the show, or?
No, not really.
Okay.
But it was the day before I was supposed to leave to move to New Hampshire. And I'm like, I've got nothing better to do. I'll go do that. Mm-hmm. So my strategy was really like, hey, I think I can get a lot of the trivia stuff right. But I also came prepared with sort of like a goofy outfit, as well as a bunch of interesting stories. Because I figured, okay, if you pass the test or whatever it is, like they're going to want to have people that are at least somewhat interesting. So
right, okay,
I could probably fake that. Mm-hmm. So I had this shirt with a a snow monkey in a thermal hot spring hanging out. And then I had these shoes that this was maybe a fad for like a year or something like that because it was a pretty bad idea. But they were the shoes that had like the individual toes on them.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So I had that get up on, pass the test, which basically it took us to the basement of this comedy club. And, 100 people at a time. And you just did like a multiple choice test of a bunch of random trivia questions. And
like sitting at a desk filling in bubbles or clicking like,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Literally. Mm-hmm. And maybe like the top 2% of people from that they took and interviewed.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're like, okay, well, you'll hear from us if we want you on the show.
Okay.
And literally the first week.
Can I ask you, the interview, were you standing in front of like a group of people at a table or were you just sitting down chit-chatting with them?
I was like standing like this in the hallway of a comedy club.
Okay.
Yeah. So his first week, I'm in Dartmouth sitting on the lawn and I get a phone call from a New York number. And it's like, hey, this is Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? We're just calling to let you know that you're in the contestant pool. I'm like, well, what does that mean? They're like, well, that means we can call you at some point and tell you you're on the show.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, is there any like time frame? They're like, I think we leave people in there a couple of years, but we just kind of pick and choose as we go. And then the next day I got a call and said, hey, can you be here on Thursday?
Wow. Okay.
So, and it was Tuesday at the time. So it was a pretty quick turnaround. So I booked some hotel rooms for my family, made arrangements, had to miss my first day of class in grad school because I had to drive to New York to be on the game show. But that was that.
And then like, did you crash course and watch a bunch of the show to like figure out strategies or you just kind of go in there and wing it?
I just went in there and wing it.
And then we won't spoil it. So you actually didn't become a millionaire.
I did not become a millionaire.
Do you maybe want to, I don't think we're spoiling anything. What was the grant, what was your exit? Like, hey, did you think about that ahead of time? Like, this is how I'm going to play it? Or did you just?
Yeah, well, so what I looked at was like, what are the different levels that you can get to and sort of walk away with guaranteed money? So, the first, there's 15 questions. The first 5 questions are just gimmies pretty much. And after 5, you're locked in at $1,000. The next time you lock in after 5 more questions is $25,000. And then the next 5 gets you from 25 to $1 million. So basically it cost me more than $1,000 to get there and get hotel rooms for my family. And I had approximately $0 to my name at the time. So I kind of knew I had to at least make what I spent back. So so basically I was probably a little more conservative than I would have been if I was playing with the house's money, if you will. The only thing I probably would have done different is there's one question that I used my phone a friend on that I kind of knew, but I only thought I kind of knew.
Right.
And if I would have got it wrong, I would have lost out in the whole deal.
Right.
But the question I went out on, it was the $25,000 question. If I walked away, I'd have $16,000 and I had no clue what the answer was. So I kind of used my last lifeline on that and walked away with $16,000.
And remind me what the lifeline is. You called your friend and the friend didn't know either. So you just stopped, or is that not how it works?
No, I can't remember exactly how it was. There's 3 of I had none left.
Okay.
By the time I was on this question. So one of them is you can call a friend.
Right.
One of them is the audience can do it. You can poll the audience.
Oh, okay. And then can you like knock out a wrong answer or something like that?
Yeah. And then one of them is it's called a 50-50. So they take 2 of the 4 away. So you have a 50% chance of getting it.
Okay.
So by the time I got to the last, I had literally no clue of the question.
I got you. Okay. All right. So they gave you a check for $16,000?
Yeah.
On the spot, or they took your address and mailed it to you later?
They took your address and mailed it to you later.
How long did you have to wait? I'm just fascinated.
I mean, it was maybe like a month, something like that.
That's not too bad. All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. All right. Good. Okay. So you did that. And then so you got the MBA and then you went into the financial, you mentioned like entrepreneurship. So that's what you wanted to do. Like you didn't just want to work in finance, but it was like entrepreneurial ventures per se.
No. So originally my plan was I wanted to try to find a way to buy a business, like buy an existing business. So I had sort of got in with a group of entrepreneurs in Cleveland, sort of rounded up by a professor at the MBA program at Case Western. And the whole group was around like helping people get to that point where they could essentially put together the backing to acquire a business and run it. Right. So I kind of thought one of the things I did was, I mentioned we worked a lot with Lockheed Martin. We also did on-site audits of like their suppliers, like the people supplying the metal housings and the electronics and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was going out to like a bunch of different, manufacturing companies, mostly pretty small mom and pop type operations, making aerospace components. And I kind of noticed that they were all owned by 7-year-old guys with no kids in the business and no real exit plan. So my thought was, hey, if I can put together some sort of backing to buy a business from one of these guys that's retiring, I've got, expertise.
Did you say
that would help
70-year-old?
Yeah.
Okay, because the way it came, at least to my ear, it sounded like you said 7-year-old. And I was going to say, well,
sorry.
It's like field's wide open. You got a bunch of 7-year-olds running.
Yeah. No, that's actually a pretty common theme in sort of U.S. small business manufacturing today, is that baby boomers own the vast majority of these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them pass them down to their kids, but a lot of their kids have no interest in working in these sort of like industrial type companies.
Yeah.
So my initial plan was find a way to earn enough money to at least put a down payment down and get a loan to do that. So I was actually applying to like McKinsey type places and stuff like that, because I figured that would be, what's the quickest way that I could sell my soul for a couple of years to make enough money to put a down payment down.
You'd be renting your soul. Yeah.
Yeah, renting it. Yes, because I was going to take it back at some point.
Yeah.
But ended up sort of finding through a weird connection at Case Western. I ended up meeting a local family that had a manufacturing company, no kids in the business, kind of looking for someone younger to come in. And we ended up sort of making a partnership that way. So I would come in, help essentially learn how to operate the business, and then help them grow through acquisition. And I would earn essentially equity in whatever we acquired. So I kind of took a weird middle ground path.
Okay. And then I don't know if it's relevant to bring it up here, but I know you knew some people that were involved in life settlements. So maybe just as part of educating the viewers, because that's...
Yeah, that was actually entirely unrelated.
Okay.
And it really didn't come into play until very recently with Infino.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my really good friends, going back to kindergarten, his father was in, corporate management roles for a number of years. But actually, when we were in high school, partnered with a handful of people to start a life settlement company. And again, for viewers that might not know, a life settlement is essentially a secondary market insurance transaction. So for somebody that might say own a whole life policy that they don't need anymore or don't want anymore or can't afford the premiums, you're allowed to sell that to a secondary buyer that would then take ownership of the policy. They would pay the rest of the premiums, but they would also collect the death benefit. So there are all kinds of jokes we had going on in high school about, hey, so-and-so's dad's working with the mob. They're going to buy life insurance policies and off people and all that kind of stuff. But so that's how I did know about that. And then when I met the team at Infino, it became relevant again, just having that knowledge because of what we're doing in terms of wanting to put together tokens backed by life insurance policies.
So maybe this is a good point to explain why what we're doing is not standard life settlement stuff, even though we do rely on the regulatory rails and whatnot. Do you maybe want to just expound on that? That's just probably good for the viewers to know, to hear, I've talked about that in the past, but make sure we're not confusing anybody.
Yeah. So essentially, when you look at sort of the current landscape of the life settlement market, what people are looking for is a stream of returns, some sort of capital appreciation that's uncorrelated with the stock market and all kinds of other assets. And what the people in the current market are doing is essentially trying to find people that have a fairly short life expectancy, whether they are elderly or whether they have a terminal illness. They're typically looking for people that might have a life expectancy of, say, 5 years or less. And what they're doing is, for somebody that has something like a universal life policy that has very little cash value in it, they are trying to do an arbitrage between the premium payments they need to make to keep that policy in force through the person passing away and what the ultimate death benefit will be on the other side. So because the policies they're buying have very little cash value in it, If the person that owns the policy just didn't want to pay the premiums anymore, they're going to end up with $0. So let's just use an example. Joe is 75 years old. He has a policy with $1 million death benefit and no cash value. And he really doesn't want to pay these premium payments anymore. He doesn't really have any heirs that might need the death benefit. So what a life settlement company may do is say, hey, Joe, we'll offer you $250,000 to take that policy over today, right? They're going to pay the premiums. So who knows what those premiums are going to be? Maybe it's another $250,000 in premiums for the 5 years. Joe passes away when he's 80. They paid Joe $250,000. They paid the insurance company $250,000, and their return is the death benefit of $1 million. So let's say that they're going to earn a return somewhere around 10% doing that. So that's what the people in the market are doing today. The thing is, the types of policy and the situation and the person that owns it ends up giving you like a very, very narrow requirement in terms of who is going to be eligible to make that kind of deal to earn the returns that they want from their investors. What we're doing, and
I can just stop you for a second, Jeff.
Yeah.
Folks at home, like you can see, is like if you've been watching TV and you see the ads for these, life, and it's like, hey, call our company and see your life insurance policy could be worth more than you think. And usually they'll show like an older guy and woman, frolicking on the beach or something, or taking their grandkids or going dancing and listening to Neil Diamond, or it's
a lot of boating and biking.
Yeah,
too.
It's not showing people who are in their 20s, because that's the point. And if you go to the website and say, the FAQ, what kind of people are we looking at? It's like, it'll say you got to be older, or, if you have some kind of condition where you're not expected, they're diplomatic about it, but it's basically, if you're not going to die anytime soon, don't talk to us. We're not interested.
Right.
Okay. But what we're doing is the opposite of that. So Can you explain how that happens?
Yeah, absolutely. So the other interesting thing is, even though those groups are trying to find, 75-year-old Joe, probably 90% of the people that call in are not that, right? Mm-hmm. So talking to some of the people in the market, like a healthy 65-year-old is still out of their wheelhouse, right? So they end up getting a lot of inquiries on people with policies that just aren't going to fit what they're looking for. So when you sort of if you look at life insurance policies from like an ROI standpoint, just over the whole life cycle on average. So what the current industry is doing is essentially taking the wrong end of the underwriting bell curve, if you will. So the people that are going to live a little bit shorter than average. So, if you look at it from the insurance company's perspective, those are the ones that they lose on, right? So that's on the losing side of the ledger for them. Mm-hmm. And they would probably rather those policies just get surrendered or lapsed than have somebody buy them and keep them in force for a couple of years till somebody passes away. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, if you look at sort of just the whole average, and one thing I'll get back to is, in order to make those sort of deals, the companies in the life settlement market need to do a whole lot of like medical underwriting. So they need to like go through doctor's reports. They do actuarial life expectancy reports. Like a lot of stuff goes into figuring out how long someone might live. Mm-hmm. When you look at the average, so let's say you didn't do any underwriting at all, and you just went out and bought life insurance policies scattershot, right? Just like dartboard, we'll buy anything. The average return is going to be somewhere in like the 4 to 5% range, right? And what that looks like is almost like a bond, like a fixed income asset. So it's not something that's going to have the return profile of equity or the stock market, but it's something that has pretty similar returns to, government bonds at this point in time, right? Or any other sort of safe asset. So what we're looking to do at Infino is acquire whole life policies that have just sort of the average attributes, bundle them together into instruments that look like fixed income. And the interesting thing about it is, there's several interesting things. One is there's a ton of it out there. So if you say that the current life settlement market, in terms of people buying policies, is somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars of policies bought every year, there's a couple $100 billion available of this type of policy. And also just in terms of, we wouldn't need to do medical underwriting. as long as the policy is structured in a way that makes sense. It also needs to be typically a couple of years old, both for regulatory reasons, but also because there's drag from commission payments to agents and stuff like that. Once you get a couple years in, it's really a steady Eddie sort of fixed income looking instrument. One thing that I really like about it is if you look at what happens just when interest rates go up, the principal value of bonds goes down, and then the opposite. That is something that could really mess around with things like pension funds and bank balance sheets and stuff like that. When you have what we're talking about, a pool of these whole life policies, essentially you can always turn them back into the life insurance carrier for a stair-step escalating value. So there's no possibility of, if interest rates go the wrong way, you're hosed in the short term because you don't, your principal value goes down. So it's just a very steady stream of returns. Also, if interest rates go down, they were at zero for years up until the past year or two, the return on whole life is going to still be, in that 4 to 5% range. So it's just a very steady form of return.
Okay, yeah. So a lot of different things. Let me just restate it since we're giving a little infomercial here for Infino and what we're doing. So yeah, I like to classify it as a win-win-win. That, like Jeff was saying, folks, the standard kind of in the existing life settlement market, what people think of it, it's typically the outside investors really only want to get policies from people who have a short runway because they need to get the death benefit is what's driving it. That's what they're in it for. And so that's why they don't want to get, and that's why they need a bunch of underwriting to say, oh, I want to make sure this person really is sick, or this person, because they don't want the person living too long, because then that reduces their return. Whereas, we're not, that's not what we want the policies because of their cash properties, not because of the death. I mean, the death benefit is not anything to keep in mind, but that's not what we're interested in it for. So it's a completely different type of existing policyholder that we might be able to reach a mutually agreeable deal with, because they're people with policies like that, someone who's 35 and healthy, and it's just his job changed. He can't keep up with the premiums on this whole life policy, but maybe it's worth $50,000 if he surrenders it. We can come in and say, whoa, we'll give you whatever, $70,000 for it, and we'll take over the premium payment. So it's good for that person. He can't sell it to an existing life settlement company because they're going to say, no, you're young and healthy. We don't want to be sitting on that for 20 years paying premiums. So we're his only outside option. So that's good for him. But it's also, like Jeff said, good for the carrier. The carrier wants the policy from a healthy 35-year-old to be kept in force. And they would lament the fact that, oh yeah, things change and occasionally a lot of our clients need to surrender it, but we wish they didn't. So these are exactly the kind of policies they want. And then the last leg, we get them, we pool them together, we build some new asset, we issue tokens like on a pool of these things, for example. And then that has a lot of interesting properties to outside asset managers who, instead of just being in traditional fixed income, we're saying to them, why don't you carve out a portion for this asset that has corporate like bond returns in the long run, but no interest rate risk. Interest rates go up, the market value of your treasury, you're sitting on 10-year treasuries, that's going to go down. Not these things, because you always have a floor. You can surrender them back to the carrier to get the cash value. So, and that's contractually locked in. And it's like Jeff said, it's a staircase. So anyway, that's just me to reiterate kind of what you said there, Jeff. Give a little commercial for Infino. In the last, whatever, we got 10 minutes or so here, Jeff, can you maybe speak? So you had seen a lot of businesses. You've been doing a lot, coming into this. You've been in the trenches now with what we're doing here, sort of in the worlds of life insurance and blockchain technology. Maybe for people who have not had that experience, can you like if there's business, people in the financial sector out there listening right now who have not been immersed in blockchain, can you maybe tell them what have you learned, or what maybe do outsiders not realize, or maybe it's AI too? I know I've been working more with the AI section than you have, but anyway, Do you get what I'm asking? Like things that I spent the last 2 years working in Infino, I didn't realize such and such.
Yeah. So this may be interesting, this may be not, but I'll
go for it. Just sell it, and so people are going to tune away if it's not.
Yeah. So one thing that's interesting to me is prior to starting with Infino, I really had zero experience in either blockchain or crypto or life insurance. Mm-hmm. And a lot of relevant experience that could go into all those different things, but not anything direct. And one of the things, and because these markets like move really quick, not the life insurance market, but the crypto and blockchain side of things, I saw a lot of the early projects sort of called on the blockchain side of things seem to be pretty superfluous, So if you hear the word NFT, you're thinking of, Bored Ape NFTs and all that sort of stuff, which great digital art is cool, I suppose, but I didn't really see a lot of meat, if you will, in a lot of the applications that were going on. And just even me just kind of like opining on like, what could you use this technology for? If you look at like replacing Ticketmaster and things like the problem of counterfeit tickets being sold on StubHub and stuff like that, that's a use case for blockchain, right? If you had an NFT that actually represented your ticket to an event, it was sort of an immutable thing that was tracked in one place, as opposed to somebody, scanning PDFs of concert tickets and uploading them to StubHub and, altering them and stuff like that. It's an immutable record. So could be music royalties, could be, whatever. So when I saw what we were looking or what Infino was looking to do in the blockchain space of life insurance, it was like, hey, this is a real use case for this stuff that could solve a bunch of problems. One of the things that we always talk about is various inefficiencies sort of in the back end, in the back office of the life insurance industry. Lots of paper, antiquated software systems, stuff like that. If you think about it, like a life insurance contract is really an NFT, right? It's a unique, bespoke contract specific to you. And by the way, we also know there's a secondary market for them, which has a lot of frictions right now because of a lot of the things that have to go on, like we talked about with life settlements and medical underwriting and stuff like that. The transaction costs of executing those sales are really high. And when we look at what we're doing, we don't need all those things, essentially trading life insurance policies like NFTs is a much cheaper, efficient way to do it, right? So I think one of the things that is a really good example is there's a company called Figure that is essentially doing home equity loans, as NFTs, if you will. And if you look at sort of the market for doing, asset-backed lending in the US, there's this, again, really antiquated system of, you have to file liens at the county recorder's office to show that, you have rights on this property. If somebody sells it, you're going to get paid out on your loan. So Figure was able to essentially take a lot of these transactional intermediary layers and compress them down to fewer layers that could happen instantaneously with blockchain. So those sort of applications, I guess really the boring applications, like a lot of the back office type stuff in securities and finance and stuff like that, are where I think you're going to see a lot of efficiencies with blockchain.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, you sort of touched on the way I would have answered that question in terms of like, what have I learned in the past 18 months or what have you that I didn't know going into it is how far along the tokenization of real world assets has gone and how many household name companies are in this space now. Like, I knew, by the year 2050, lots of financial transactions are going to be on blockchains of various, but I didn't realize by 2025, you're going to be surprised at how much stuff is going on there. Infino's getting involved in doing it with life insurance, but it's not as sci-fi as I had thought 2 years ago. And so that's
right. And I think the other thing that's interesting is I think the biggest ticket applications that are going to use blockchain, the consumer or the end user or whoever it is, isn't even going to know there's blockchain involved. It's just what goes on in the background. Right. Almost like a new form of a database or something like that. And that's one thing where you have to go through some technological learnings, if you will, to get into, having your NFT wallets and all that sort of stuff to buy your Bored Apes. But I think the real heavy hitting blockchain use cases, all that's going to be abstracted away. And the person that's sort of on one end of the user experience isn't even going to know that anything related to blockchain is involved. It's just sort of the internal guts of the system.
Yeah, like I've heard people say, you don't need to know how quantum physics works to use your iPhone.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Yeah. So it's the same kind of thing here. And I did see that like in the earlier, because I knew a bunch. So again, folks, Jeff knows he was distinguishing between crypto and blockchain, that crypto uses blockchain, but that's the distributed ledger, public ledger technology is that's a separate thing. But yeah, like in the early days of Bitcoin, I knew a bunch of people who were like evangelizing it and going around and some other people were like, if it's a new, like people didn't have to go around saying, hey, the horse and buggy is really outdated and you should really use an automobile. Like you didn't have to go beating them over the head with it. Like you could just kind of, if it's a new technology, it's going to work. It's going to be, the adoption is going to be pretty quick once you work out and make it convenient for the user. So I think that's what we're seeing now. Like you say, with Figure, that people getting HELOCs that way, they don't even know that there's blockchain involved.
Right.
Okay, well, that's a great place for us to wrap up. So my guest has been Jeff Briggs. Thanks for your stories and your insights.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. And in the future weeks here, we'll show you some more personnel from Infino. I've got some other people in mind that I want to showcase just to show how deep the bench is here at Infino. We'll catch you next time.
This concludes another episode of InFi, the Future of Finance, with Dr. Robert Murphy. The information provided is for educational purposes and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with qualified professionals before making any financial or investment decisions. For more information on the host and for previous episodes, visit infi, thefutureoffinance.io. Thanks for listening.